The elevator doors opened to the 62nd floor, and Tatum Vance stepped out, carrying a leather binder she had prepared the night before. Inside it were quarterly reports, logistics forecasts, and a proposal to restructure 4 of the syndicate's legitimate front companies into actual profitable businesses. She had spent 11 hours on that proposal. Every number was clean, every projection was backed by data she had personally verified. She walked through the executive corridor with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was good at what she did. 3 years she had worked for the Thorne family operation, 3 years of turning chaos into systems, of finding money leaks that nobody else could find, of building an operational framework so tight that even Griffin Thorne's own advisors admitted she had saved the organization millions. And she had done all of it from the shadows. No title, no public credit, just results. Griffin's corner office sat behind a frosted glass wall with no nameplate on the door. That was his style. The most powerful man in the city operated from a room that looked like it belonged to a mid-level accountant. Tatum had always respected that about him. Power that didn't need to announce itself. She knocked twice and entered. Griffin Thorne stood behind his desk with his back to her, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the downtown skyline. He was 28 years old, built lean, with dark hair cropped short, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as the buildings below. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, and his hands were clasped behind his back in a way that made him look like a man about to deliver a verdict. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Tatum closed it. She set her leather binder on the edge of his desk and waited. She had learned a long time ago that Griffin spoke when he was ready, and pushing him before that moment only slowed things down. He turned around. His expression was completely flat. No warmth, no acknowledgement. His dark eyes swept over her once, and then he sat down and opened a manila folder that was already centered on his desk. "Your work for this family is finished," he said. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Tatum blinked. "Excuse me?" "Effective immediately." Griffin slid the folder across the desk toward her. "Inside you'll find the deed to a property on the outer ridge, Crestview Estate. The transfer is already complete. Your name is on it." Tatum didn't touch the folder. She stared at Griffin, searching his face for some sign that this was a strategy meeting, that there was a larger play she wasn't seeing yet. Because there was always a larger play with Griffin, always another layer. "You're giving me a house," she said slowly. "I'm giving you a property," Griffin corrected, "and I'm asking you to relocate there by tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Yes." "Griffin, I just finished a restructuring proposal that could—" "I don't need it," he cut her off without raising his voice. That was the thing about Griffin Thorne. He never raised his voice. He never had to. The proposal, the reports, the forecasts, none of it matters anymore. Your chapter here is closed. Tatum felt something cold settle in the center of her chest. She had been in high-pressure rooms before. She had negotiated with suppliers who screamed, with distributors who threatened, with accountants who lied to her face. She had handled all of it without flinching. But this was different. This was Griffin. The one person in the entire operation she had trusted completely, looking at her like she was a line item being struck from a budget. "Can I at least know why?" she asked. Her voice stayed steady, but the effort it took to keep it that way was enormous. "Because I said so." Griffin leaned back in his chair. "You've been compensated fairly. The estate is valuable land, even if the structure needs work. Consider it severance." Severance. She repeated the word like it tasted wrong. 3 years of building your entire operational backbone, and you're calling a crumbling house on a ridge severance. I'm calling it generous. Silence filled the office. The city hummed 62 stories below, completely unaware that the woman who had quietly held one of its most powerful organizations together was being discarded like yesterday's newspaper. Tatum picked up the manila folder. She opened it and looked at the deed. The property description listed a 7-acre estate built in 1923, located on the outer ridge above the harbor. There was a black-and-white photograph clipped to the first page. A sprawling mansion with stone columns, arched windows, and a circular driveway that must have been magnificent 100 years ago.
"This place looks abandoned," she said.
"It's been unoccupied for 12 years, Griffin confirmed. "The bones are good."
"The bones are good," Tatum almost laughed. "You're sending me to live in a skeleton."
Griffin said nothing. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and Tatum realized something that made the cold in her chest spread all the way to her fingertips. He had already made this decision long before she walked through that door. The meeting wasn't a discussion, it was a notification. She closed the folder and tucked it under her arm. "Fine," she said. Griffin's expression shifted by a fraction. Something flickered behind his eyes, just for half a second, and then it was gone. If Tatum had blinked, she would have missed it entirely. "Fine," he repeated. "You want me gone? I'm gone." She picked up her leather binder from the desk and held it out to him. "But you should still read this proposal. It'll save you about $4 million over the next 2 quarters. Consider it a parting gift." She set the binder down in front of him, turned, and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when Griffin spoke again. "Tatum." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Don't contact anyone from the organization once you leave this building. No calls, no messages, no visits. Clean break." The instruction was specific enough to feel like a warning. Tatum absorbed it, filed it away in the part of her mind that never forgot anything, and opened the door. "Goodbye, Griffin," she said over her shoulder. She didn't wait for a response. She walked back through the corridor, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and for the first time in 3 years, Tatum Vance was completely on her own. She looked down at the manila folder in her hands. 7 acres, a century-old mansion, 12 years of neglect. And then she did something that would have surprised anyone who had just witnessed that conversation. She smiled. Because Tatum Vance had learned a long time ago that the best things she had ever built were the ones other people had thrown away. And Griffin Thorne had just thrown away the most valuable piece of real estate on the outer ridge without even realizing what he had done. He wanted her gone? She would be gone. And she would build something so extraordinary on that ridge that the entire city would look up at it and wonder how they had ever overlooked the woman who made it happen. What Tatum didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as the elevator descended and the downtown skyline disappeared behind her, was that 30 seconds after she left his office, Griffin Thorne opened her leather binder, read the first page of her proposal, and closed his eyes. His phone buzzed, a message from his head of security. "Silas confirmed meeting with the inner council tonight. He's making his move." Griffin deleted the message and looked at the door Tatum had just walked through. Sending her away was the only move that guaranteed she would survive what was coming. And if she hated him for it, if she spent the rest of her life believing he had discarded her, that was a price he was willing to pay. He just hoped the walls of Crestview would be thick enough to keep her safe until this was over. The drive from downtown took 47 minutes. Tatum counted every one of them because the farther she got from the city center, the more the roads narrowed and the trees thickened and the signal bars on her phone dropped one by one until there was nothing left. By the time she turned onto the unmarked gravel road that the GPS insisted was the main approach to Crestview Estate, she was surrounded by overgrown oaks and tangled brush on both sides, and the only sound was loose stone popping under her tires. The iron gate appeared first, 12 feet tall, rusted the color of dried blood, leaning slightly inward like 2 tired soldiers still trying to hold their post. The lock was so corroded that Tatum didn't even need the key from the manila folder.
She pushed the left gate with her shoulder, and it groaned open, scraping a half circle through the weeds that had grown up around its base. Beyond the gate, a circular driveway stretched out in front of her, cracked and split by roots that had been pushing through the stone for over a decade. And at the center of that driveway, standing in the pale morning light like a cathedral that time had forgotten, was Crestview. Tatum stopped walking and just looked at it. The mansion was enormous.
3 full stories of gray stone and dark timber, with a pair of towering columns framing the main entrance and arched windows running across the entire second floor. A widow's walk wrapped around the rooftop, its iron railing bent and sagging in places. The front steps were broad enough to park a car on, and the double doors at the top were made of carved oak so thick that they looked like they could stop a battering ram. Every window on the ground floor was dark. Half of them were boarded up. The ones that weren't had spiderweb cracks running through their glass, and the large, stained glass panel above the main entrance, what must have once been a stunning mosaic of amber and deep blue, had a hole in its center the size of a basketball. Ivy had consumed the entire west side of the building. It climbed the stone walls in thick ropes, curled around the drain pipes, and had even crawled across sections of the roof. The east wing looked slightly better, with its stonework still mostly visible and its windows intact, though layers of grime made them almost opaque. Tatum pulled her jacket tighter and climbed the front steps. The doors were unlocked. She pushed them open and stepped inside, and immediately the smell hit her. Damp wood, old dust, and something faintly sweet that might have been rotting wallpaper paste. The entrance hall was vast. A grand staircase swept upward from the center of the room, splitting at a landing into 2 curved flights that led to the upper floors. A chandelier hung above the landing, still intact, draped in cobwebs so thick they looked like gray curtains. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dim hall and revealed marble floors beneath the dust, intricate crown molding along the ceilings, and wood-paneled walls that, despite the neglect, still had a warmth to them. The craftsmanship was obvious even under 12 years of abandonment. Whoever had built this place had built it to last. Tatum spent the next 3 hours walking through every accessible room on the ground floor and east wing. She found a formal dining room with a table long enough to seat 20, still standing on its original legs. A conservatory with a glass ceiling, half of its panes shattered, the floor covered in dried leaves and bird droppings. A drawing room with built-in bookshelves that stretched floor to ceiling, empty except for a few water-damaged volumes and a brass reading lamp still sitting on a side table as though someone had just stepped away for tea. And then she found the kitchen. It was at the back of the east wing, and, unlike the rest of the house, it was enormous in a functional way. Industrial-sized countertops, a stone hearth wide enough to roast a whole animal, copper pipes running along the ceiling that connected to what must have been a sophisticated water system for its era. The fixtures were green with corrosion, the countertops were stained, and the floor tiles were cracked in a dozen places. But the bones, the layout, the scale, the logic of the space were extraordinary. Tatum set her bag down on the one clean section of countertop she could find, opened her phone, and started making a list. By noon, that list had 43 items on it. Structural assessments needed for the west wing, roof inspection for the entire building, electrical rewiring from scratch, plumbing replacement, window restoration or replacement, depending on what the glazier said, stained glass commission for the entrance panel, landscaping for the entire 7-acre grounds. She looked at the list and did the math in her head. The scope of this project was massive. It would take months of focused work, a team of specialists, and more money than she currently had in her savings. And then she looked up from her phone and stared through the kitchen window at the view beyond. The outer ridge dropped away behind the estate, and from this angle, Tatum could see the entire harbor spread out below. The shipping docks, the waterfront district, the financial towers glinting in the distance,
and beyond all of it, the open water stretching to the horizon. It was the kind of view that real estate developers would have paid tens of millions for. The kind of view that turned a property from expensive into priceless. Griffin had given her this. He had given her this and called it severance, like it was a consolation prize. Like he was doing her a favor by pushing her out the door with a pat on the head and a ruined mansion on a hill. Tatum closed her phone and leaned against the counter.
The anger she had swallowed in his office was still there, sitting in her ribcage like a low flame. She let it burn. She had learned years ago that anger, when aimed properly, was the most efficient fuel there was. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, the physical kind, spiral-bound, because some things she didn't trust to screens, and wrote 3 words at the top of the first page. Make it legendary. She underlined it twice, closed the notebook, and walked back through the grand hall toward the east wing. There was a room near the front of that wing with intact windows, a working fireplace, and enough floor space to set up a temporary desk and a sleeping cot. It would do for now. As she dragged her 2 suitcases up the stairs and into the room, she paused at the window and looked out at the overgrown grounds. Somewhere beneath all that ivy and those cracked stones and those boarded-up windows was a house that had once been the jewel of this ridge. She could feel it, the way an architect could feel the shape of a building inside an empty lot, or the way a musician could hear a melody inside silence. It was still here, buried, forgotten, given up on by everyone who had ever looked at it. Just like her. Tatum set up her cot, plugged her laptop into the one outlet that still worked, and began drafting the most ambitious restoration plan she had ever attempted. She worked until the sun went down, and the only light in the room came from her screen and the distant glow of the city below the ridge. She didn't sleep that first night at Crestview. There was too much to plan, too much to prove. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet, steady voice kept repeating the same thought over and over. He gave you a ruin. Turn it into a kingdom. 10 days into living at Crestview, Tatum had filled 3 notebooks with measurements, sketches, structural notes, and cost estimates. She had crawled through the attic, tested the load-bearing walls with a borrowed stud finder, mapped every crack in the foundation she could access, and photographed over 400 individual problem areas across the mansion. Her temporary room in the east wing now looked less like a bedroom and more like a war room. Papers pinned to the walls, material samples spread across the floor, and a color-coded spreadsheet glowing on her laptop that tracked every task by priority, cost, and timeline. She had done everything she could do alone. Now, she needed people. The historic downtown restoration center sat on the corner of Whitfield and Broad, tucked between a converted warehouse gallery and a law firm that specialized in landmark property disputes. The building itself was a restored 1890s fire station with exposed brick walls and arched engine bay doors that had been converted into floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the city's most respected preservation architects, structural engineers, and master tradespeople kept offices, shared workshop space, and argued constantly about the proper way to restore original plasterwork. Tatum arrived at 9 in the morning, wearing a clean blazer over a work shirt that still had plaster dust on the cuffs. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and a rolled-up set of hand-drawn floor plans under the other. She had called ahead and booked the center's main conference room for 2 hours, and she had invited 7 people, each one hand-picked after a week of research into the region's top restoration specialists. 5 of them showed up. The first was Margaret Calloway, a 61-year-old structural engineer who had supervised the restoration of 3 landmark bridges and a 19th-century opera house. She had silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and a reputation for telling clients exactly what they didn't want to hear. She sat at the head of the table like she owned it. The second was Reggie Park, a master carpenter in his mid-40s who had trained under a Japanese joinery master and could identify wood species by smell.
He was quiet, broad-shouldered, and kept a pencil behind his ear at all times, even when he already had one in his hand. The third was Dominique Alessi, an interior preservation architect who had restored 4 Gilded Age mansions on the East Coast. She was sharp, fast-talking, and already flipping through Tatum's portfolio before the meeting officially started. The fourth was Hector Ruiz, an electrical and plumbing systems specialist who had rewired a 200-year-old cathedral without removing a single original fixture. He came in with coffee for everyone, and a quiet confidence that made him instantly likable. The fifth was Nina Chen, a landscape architect who had redesigned botanical gardens, public parks, and 3 private estates that had later been featured in national design magazines. She sat with her legs crossed and a tablet in her lap, already sketching something before Tatum said a word. The 2 who didn't show up had sent polite declines. One was booked for the next 18 months. The other had simply written back, "I don't take on projects outside city limits." Tatum didn't waste time with small talk. She unrolled her floor plans across the conference table, opened her portfolio to the photographic survey she had assembled, and laid out the scope in plain language. Crestview Estate, built in 1923. 7 acres on the outer ridge overlooking the harbor. 3 stories, approximately 22,000 square feet. The east wing is structurally sound. The west wing has significant settling and possible water damage in the lower walls. The roof needs full replacement in at least 2 sections. Electrical is non-existent by modern standards. Plumbing is original copper, mostly corroded. Grounds haven't been maintained in 12 years. She paused and looked around the table. "I want to restore this property to its original architectural integrity while integrating modern luxury infrastructure, climate systems, smart glass technology, high-end security, and full digital connectivity. I want the finished result to be a place where someone from 1923 would recognize every room, and someone from today would never want to leave." Margaret Calloway was the first to speak. "Who owns this property?" "I do," Tatum said.
"And who's funding the restoration?"
"I am." Margaret studied her over the top of her reading glasses. "This kind of project, at this scale, with the level of finish you're describing, you're looking at significant capital. How are you planning to finance it?" Tatum had expected the question. She pulled a second folder from her portfolio and opened it on the table. Inside was a bank pre-approval letter, a land valuation report, and a collateral assessment she had commissioned from an independent appraiser 3 days earlier. "The estate sits on 7 acres of ridgetop land with unobstructed harbor views," Tatum said. "The independent appraisal puts the land value alone at just over $14 million. I'm securing a construction loan against that collateral. The bank has already reviewed the numbers and issued preliminary approval." The room was quiet for a moment. Dominique Alessi stopped flipping through the portfolio and looked up. Reggie Park leaned forward. Even Margaret's expression shifted from skeptical to interested. "You appraised the land in 10 days?" Nina Chen asked from her end of the table. "I appraised the land in 3, Tatum said. "It took 7 more to finish the structural survey and put together everything you're looking at now." Hector Ruiz set down his coffee. "You did the structural survey yourself?" "Preliminary, yes. I need Margaret to do the real one. But I wanted to know what I was asking you all to walk into before I asked." Margaret picked up one of the floor plan pages and held it close to her reading glasses. She studied it for almost a full minute while the rest of the room waited. Then she set it down and looked at Tatum with something that hadn't been there before. Respect. "Your measurements are good," Margaret said. "Your load-bearing wall identifications are accurate, and your prioritization sequence is exactly how I would have ordered it." She folded her arms. "When do you want me to start?" "Monday," Tatum said. "I'll be there at 7. One by one, the others agreed. Reggie wanted to see the original woodwork before committing to a timeline, but he was in. Dominique was already making notes about period-appropriate wallpaper sources. Hector asked for the electrical panel location so he could bring the right diagnostic equipment. Nina requested a satellite image of the grounds so she could start mapping the landscape grid. Tatum left the restoration center 2 hours later with a signed letter of intent from all 5 specialists, a preliminary construction timeline that stretched across 5 months, and a budget framework that would eat through every dollar of her loan and leave almost nothing for error.
Standing on the sidewalk outside the building, she looked at the folder in her hands.
The numbers were enormous. The risk was enormous. If the restoration went over budget, if the loan terms shifted, if even one major structural surprise was hiding in those walls, she could lose everything. The estate, the loan, her entire financial future, all of it balanced on her ability to execute a plan this massive with zero margin for mistakes. A smarter person might have hesitated. Tatum pulled out her phone and called the bank to schedule the final loan signing. Because the thing about having nothing to fall back on was that it removed the option of falling back. She had no family money, no syndicate backing, no safety net of any kind. Griffin had made sure of that when he cut her off completely. Every connection, every resource, every ally she had built over 3 years, gone in a 5-minute conversation.
All she had was a crumbling mansion, a sharp mind, and the kind of stubborn determination that people either admired or feared, depending on which side of it they were standing on. She was going to build something extraordinary, and she was going to do it on her own terms, with her own money, using her own name. Griffin Thorne had thrown her away. The city was about to find out what happened when Tatum Vance decided to throw herself into something. By day 25, Crestview looked like a living construction site. Scaffolding climbed the west wing exterior, tarps covered 3 sections of the roof where Reggie's crew had already stripped away rotted timber, and a steady rhythm of hammers and power saws echoed across the grounds from morning until dark. Hector's electrical team had torn out the original knob and tube wiring from the entire first floor and started running modern conduit behind the walls, careful to preserve the original plaster wherever Margaret said it was salvageable. Nina had marked out the landscape grid across the front grounds with fluorescent stakes and string, and a crew of 4 had already begun clearing the worst of the ivy from the west facade. Tatum was everywhere. She moved between teams with a clipboard and a walkie-talkie, making decisions in real time, approving material orders, settling disputes between the carpenter crew and the plumbing team about which walls could be opened and which couldn't, reviewing Dominique's fabric samples for the drawing room, and keeping the budget spreadsheet updated on her laptop every evening before she allowed herself to eat dinner. The library restoration had become her personal project within the project. It sat at the heart of the ground floor, a rectangular room roughly 40 feet long and 25 feet wide, with mahogany-paneled walls that rose 12 feet to a coffered ceiling. The panels were water-stained in places, warped in others, and a few had come loose from their mounts entirely. But the wood itself was extraordinary, deep, rich mahogany, with a grain pattern so tight and uniform that Reggie had whistled through his teeth the first time he saw it. "This is old growth," he had told her, running his hand along one of the panels. "You can't buy wood like this anymore. Whoever sourced this material in 1923 spent a fortune." Tatum had decided to restore every single panel by hand rather than replace them. It was slower, more expensive, and more labor-intensive than anyone on the team thought was reasonable. But she had looked at those walls and seen something worth saving, and that was the end of the discussion. On this particular afternoon, she was supervising Reggie and 2 of his apprentices as they carefully removed a section of damaged paneling from the library's north wall. The panel had buckled inward over the years, pushed by what Margaret suspected was moisture migration from an old plumbing leak behind the wall. Reggie worked slowly, prying the panel away from its frame with a flat bar wrapped in cloth to avoid marking the wood. The panel came free with a long, low creak. Reggie set it aside on a padded sawhorse and turned back to examine the wall cavity behind it. "Tatum," he said, "come look at this." She stepped closer and aimed her flashlight into the gap. Behind the panel,
Instead of bare wall studs and old plaster, there was a metal surface, dark grey, slightly textured, with a recessed handle and a combination dial. A wall safe, built directly into the framing, hidden behind the mahogany paneling, completely invisible unless someone removed that exact section of wall.
Tatum stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached in and turned the handle. It was unlocked. The safe door swung open with a stiff groan, and inside, lying flat on a metal shelf, was a leather document tube. The kind architects used to store rolled blueprints. It was old, cracked at the edges, but still intact. Below it sat a small metal lockbox, also unlocked, containing a set of brass keys on a ring and a folded piece of stationery. Tatum pulled out the document tube first. She carried it to the library's central table, a massive oak piece that the crew had cleaned and stabilized earlier that week, and carefully unscrewed the cap. Inside were 3 large sheets of architectural paper, yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved by the sealed tube. She unrolled them across the table and weighed down the corners with books from a nearby shelf. The first sheet was a complete floor plan of Crestview's ground level, drawn in precise drafting ink with measurements in feet and inches along every wall. The title block in the lower right corner read, Crestview Estate, Original Construction Plans, 1923, Morrison and Blackwell Architects. The second sheet showed the upper floors and roof structure. Every beam, every joist, every load path was mapped with the kind of detail that modern blueprints often skipped. Margaret would lose her mind when she saw these. The third sheet made Tatum stop breathing. It was a subterranean plan. A full basement level that didn't appear on any of the documentation she had received with the deed. According to this blueprint, beneath the west wing of the mansion, accessed through a staircase hidden behind a false wall in the conservatory, there was an entire underground level. 3 reinforced rooms connected by a narrow corridor with concrete walls 2 feet thick and a ventilation system that drew fresh air through disguised ground-level vents in the garden. And in the margins of that third blueprint, written in pencil in a handwriting she recognized instantly, were annotations. Vault door, replace with reinforced steel. Biometric lock. Emergency egress. Tunnel extends 240 feet northeast to tree line. Exit concealed under maintenance shed. Ventilation system. Upgrade to filtered. Add backup generator. Griffin's handwriting. She had read his notes on hundreds of documents over 3 years. She knew the sharp angles of his capital letters, the way he underlined key words with a single decisive stroke, the slight leftward slant that appeared when he was writing fast. There was no question. These annotations were his. Tatum sat down slowly in one of the library chairs and stared at the blueprints spread across the table in front of her. Griffin had been here before her. He had studied these original plans, found the hidden subterranean level, and made modifications. Reinforced vault doors, biometric locks, an escape tunnel running 240 feet to the tree line, a backup generator, filtered ventilation. These weren't the upgrades of someone preparing a property for sale. These were the preparations of someone expecting danger. She picked up the folded stationery from the lockbox and opened it. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with no letterhead. 2 lines of text in the same handwriting. The combination is your employee number reversed. Don't trust anyone who knows this address before you tell them. That was it. No signature, no explanation. No apology for the way he had spoken to her in his office. Just a combination code and a warning. Tatum read the note 3 times. Then she folded it, slid it into her back pocket, and looked at the blueprint again. The picture she had built in her head over the past 25 days, the picture of Griffin Thorne as a cold, ungrateful man who had used her skills and discarded her when he was done, cracked right down the center. He hadn't discarded her. He had fortified a position for her. Every modification on that blueprint was designed to protect whoever was living in this house.
The vault rooms, the escape tunnel, the biometric locks, these weren't random infrastructure. They were defensive infrastructure, installed quietly, before he ever signed the deed over. He had planned this. All of it. The dismissal, the estate, the hidden safe with the blueprints inside. It was a calculated sequence designed to move her out of harm's way while giving her something valuable enough to start over with.
The anger in her chest, the flame she had been using as fuel for the past 3.5 weeks, flickered. She didn't let it go out. She couldn't afford to. That anger had gotten her this far, had pushed her through 18-hour days and impossible budget calculations and the bone-deep exhaustion of rebuilding a mansion with her bare hands and borrowed money. But the shape of it changed. It was still fire, still fuel, still hers. It just aimed differently now. Because the question was no longer, why did he throw me away? The question was, what is he protecting me from? Tatum rolled the blueprints carefully, slid them back into the leather tube, and locked the safe. She left the library and walked to the conservatory, where she spent 20 minutes examining the walls, until she found a seam in the paneling that didn't match the rest. Behind it, exactly where the blueprint said it would be, was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. She didn't go down. Not yet. She had a restoration to run, a crew to manage, and a budget that wouldn't survive a single wasted day. But she would be back, and when she came back, she would understand exactly what Griffin Thorne had built beneath her feet, and why he had gone to such lengths to make sure she was the one standing above it. 2 months in, and Crestview didn't look like the same building. The scaffolding was coming down section by section, revealing freshly restored stonework that gleamed pale gray in the morning light. The ivy was gone from the west wing, stripped away to expose original carved stone detailing around every window that nobody had seen in decades. The roof had been fully replaced, with hand-cut slate tiles sourced from the same quarry region as the originals, and the new copper guttering ran clean and bright along the eaves. The front steps had been re-leveled, the cracked driveway stones replaced with period-appropriate flagstone, and the iron gate at the entrance had been sandblasted, reforged where the rust had eaten through, and repainted in matte black. But the real transformation was happening inside. Tatum stood in the center of the grand ballroom on day 60 and looked up at what her team had created. The ballroom occupied the entire south side of the ground floor, a massive rectangular space with 20-foot ceilings and a row of arched windows along the far wall that framed the harbor view like a gallery of living paintings. When she had first walked into this room 2 months ago, the ceiling had been sagging, the plaster cornices had been crumbling, and the original parquet floor had been so warped by water damage that it rolled like gentle hills underfoot. Now the ceiling soared flat and true above her, restored to its original coffered design by Reggie's team, each recessed panel lined with thin gold leaf that caught the light and threw it softly across the room. The plaster cornices had been rebuilt by a specialist Dominique had brought in from her East Coast network, a 73-year-old artisan who worked with original molds cast from the 1923 patterns and refused to use anything made after 1960. The parquet floor had been Tatum's proudest fight. Margaret had recommended tearing it out entirely and pouring a modern subfloor with new hardwood on top. Faster, cheaper, and structurally guaranteed. Tatum had listened to the recommendation, studied the original floor pattern for 2 days, and then told Margaret she wanted to save it. It had taken Reggie and 4 of his best people 3 weeks. They removed each damaged section by hand, steamed the warped boards back into shape where possible, replaced the ones that couldn't be saved with reclaimed wood of matching species and age, and then sanded and refinished the entire surface until it gleamed like dark honey. Standing on it now, Tatum could feel the slight warmth of the radiant heating system Hector had installed beneath the subfloor, modern comfort hidden completely inside the original structure.
The arched windows were the final piece. Tatum had hired a glass studio in the historic district to fabricate custom smart glass panels fitted inside reproduction frames that matched the original 1923 profiles. From the outside, they looked exactly like the windows that had always been there. From the inside, a single touch on a concealed panel could shift the glass from fully transparent to opaque, adjust the tint to filter afternoon glare, or activate a privacy mode that turned every window into a mirror from the exterior.
A person standing in the ballroom could see the entire harbor. A person standing outside could see nothing. Dominique had called it the most elegant integration of modern technology into a historic space she had ever worked on. Reggie had simply looked at the finished room, nodded once, and said, "This is good work." Coming from him, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The rest of the mansion had undergone the same treatment. The library's mahogany panels were restored and sealed, the brass reading lamps rewired and polished, and new shelving installed behind hidden panels to hold modern media equipment. The conservatory's shattered glass ceiling had been replaced with a hybrid system, structural glass panels with integrated climate sensors that could open and close ventilation sections automatically based on temperature and humidity. The kitchen had been gutted and rebuilt into a commercial-grade culinary space with stone countertops, custom cabinetry, and a walk-in cold room large enough to supply a banquet for 200. The drawing room, the dining hall, the upper floor suites, the widow's walk, reinforced and rebuilt with tempered glass railings that were nearly invisible. Every room had been touched, restored, and quietly upgraded. And then there were the systems nobody could see. Hector had wired the entire estate with a security network that operated on its own encrypted frequency. Every door had a biometric lock that could be activated remotely. Every window had a sensor that detected vibration, pressure, and unauthorized contact. The perimeter of the 7-acre property was monitored by ground-level cameras concealed inside restored garden fixtures, stone urns, iron lamp posts, a decorative sundial near the front gate. The entire system fed into a control room Tatum had built in the basement of the East Wing, accessible only through a keypad behind a sliding bookcase panel in the library hallway. She had gone down those hidden stairs behind the conservatory wall 2 weeks after finding the blueprints. The subterranean level was exactly as Griffin's annotations had described: 3 reinforced rooms with 2-foot concrete walls, a narrow corridor connecting them, and an escape tunnel running northeast to a concealed exit under a maintenance shed near the tree line. The biometric locks were already installed on the vault doors, programmed to her thumbprint. Griffin had entered her biometrics into the system before she ever set foot on the property. Tatum had stood in that underground corridor and let that fact settle into her. He had planned for her safety down to the molecular level. The locks recognized her. The ventilation system was already running on the backup generator he had installed. The escape tunnel was clear, lit by battery-powered emergency strips, and opened into a shed that looked like it hadn't been used in years from the outside. She had told no one about the subterranean level. Not Margaret, not Reggie, not Dominique or Hector or Nina. The hidden stairs behind the conservatory wall remained sealed, the seam recovered by a panel that matched perfectly. Whatever Griffin had built down there, it was between him and her, and she intended to keep it that way until she understood the full picture. Above ground, the transformation was complete. Tatum stood on the newly restored Widow's Walk on day 60 and looked out at the view that had first convinced her this property was worth fighting for. The harbor spread out below, the city skyline rose to the south, and the open water stretched endlessly to the west. The evening light turned everything gold. Nina's landscape work had reshaped the grounds into something between a formal English garden and a modern sculpture park. Gravel pathways wound through beds of native plantings, mature trees had been pruned and lit with subtle uplighting, and the circular driveway had been restored with a central fountain that used recycled rainwater from a collection system built into the new roof.
Tatum leaned against the glass railing and pulled out her phone. She opened a new contact card and typed 2 words: the Crestview Sanctuary. That was its name now. She had chosen it deliberately. Sanctuary meant safety, refuge, a place people came to when they needed to be somewhere that nothing could touch them. It was a word that carried weight without aggression, exclusivity without arrogance. She saved the contact card and began drafting the invitation list for the opening night. 200 names. Tech founders, venture capitalists, corporate executives, media owners, real estate titans. Every person on the list was someone whose attendance alone would make headlines. Tatum had spent 3 years building systems for Griffin Thorne's organization from the shadows. She knew how influence worked. She knew that power wasn't just about what you owned. It was about who walked through your doors and what they said about you when they left. The Crestview Sanctuary was about to open its doors for the first time. And when those 200 guests walked in and saw what she had built from the ruin Griffin Thorne had given her, every single one of them was going to say the same thing. Who is Tatum Vance, and how did we miss her? The invitation said 8 o'clock. By 7:45, the driveway was full. Black sedans and town cars lined the flagstone approach in a procession that stretched from the restored iron gates all the way to the circular fountain. Drivers in dark suits stood beside open doors as some of the most powerful people in the country stepped out into the warm evening air and got their first look at the Crestview Sanctuary. Tatum watched from the second-floor landing through the stained glass window above the entrance. The mosaic had been fully rebuilt. Amber and deep blue panels arranged in a geometric sunburst pattern that cast colored light across the marble floor below when the interior chandeliers hit it at the right angle. She had approved the final design herself, and standing behind it now, watching the arriving guests through the blue and gold, she allowed herself one quiet moment to absorb what was happening. Her home was full of people who had flown in from 3 different time zones to be here. She straightened the collar of her tailored black dress. Simple, expensive, chosen specifically because it communicated authority without trying to impress, and walked downstairs. The grand ballroom was already alive. A string quartet played from a raised platform near the east wall, their music threading through the hum of conversation that filled the room. Waitstaff in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and small plates from the kitchen, where a private chef Tatum had hired for the evening was running a 12-course tasting menu built entirely around regional ingredients. Tatum moved through the crowd the way she had learned to move through every room she had ever entered, with purpose, warmth, and complete awareness of who was standing where. She greeted each guest personally. She answered questions about the restoration with enough detail to demonstrate mastery and enough brevity to keep people wanting more. She introduced guests to each other when she sensed a useful connection, and she stepped away the moment the connection took hold, leaving them to build it on their own. Within an hour, the ballroom was operating exactly the way she had designed it to, as a space where powerful people felt comfortable enough to let their guard down and open enough to make decisions. A venture capitalist from the West Coast asked about hosting a private investors retreat at the estate. A media executive mentioned wanting to shoot a profile segment on the restoration. A tech founder whose company had just gone through a major acquisition pulled Tatum aside and asked if the sanctuary offered long-term private residency packages for executives who needed a secure, discreet location away from public attention. Tatum handed each of them a card with a private scheduling line and told them her team would follow up within the week. She had no team yet. She would build one. That was a problem for tomorrow. By 9:30, the ballroom was at full capacity. The courtyard terrace was open for guests who wanted to see the harbor view under the stars, and the conservatory had been set up as a quieter lounge space with low lighting, leather seating, and a curated selection of rare spirits. Every space in the mansion was being used exactly as Tatum had envisioned during those sleepless nights in the East Wing with nothing but a laptop and a notebook. She was standing in the courtyard, speaking with a commercial real estate developer about the possibility of hosting an annual design summit at the sanctuary, when something caught her attention. A man was standing alone at the far end of the terrace, leaning against the stone balustrade with a glass in his hand. He wore a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit, and he was looking out at the harbor view with his back to the crowd. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He hadn't approached the bar or accepted anything from the waitstaff.
He was simply standing there, still and separate, watching the city lights reflect off the water below.
Tatum recognized him before she saw his face, the posture, the way he held himself apart from a room full of people, as though proximity was something he rationed carefully. The lean frame inside a suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. Griffin Thorne. Her chest tightened. She excused herself from the developer, crossed the terrace, and stopped 6 feet behind him. "You weren't on the invitation list," she said. Griffin didn't turn around. "I came through the service entrance. Your catering team leaves the east corridor unlocked when they're running trays." "I'll fix that tomorrow." "You should fix it tonight." Tatum stepped forward until she was standing beside him at the balustrade. She looked at his profile in the terrace light. He looked the same. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, that expression that gave away nothing.
But there was something around the edges that hadn't been there 2.5 months ago. A tension in the set of his shoulders, a thinness in his face that suggested long hours and missed meals.
"You look tired," she said.
"You look successful."
He took a sip from his glass and finally turned to face her.
His eyes moved across her face the way they always had, quickly, completely, cataloging everything. "The estate is remarkable, Tatum. What you've done here is beyond anything I expected."
"You expected something?"
"I expected you to survive. I didn't expect you to build an empire."
"It's a venue, Griffin. A restoration project."
"It's a power base." His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the same weight it always had. "Every person in that ballroom right now is someone who can move markets, shape industries, and redirect capital with a phone call. And they're all here because you invited them. They're drinking your champagne, standing in your rooms, looking at your view. You understand what that means." Tatum understood exactly what it meant. She had designed the evening specifically to achieve it, but hearing Griffin say it out loud, hearing him acknowledge the scale of what she had built, stirred something in her that she hadn't expected. A flicker of the old dynamic, the one where he saw the full picture and she was the one who made it real. She pushed it down. She had work to do. "Why are you here?" she asked. "And don't tell me you came to compliment the renovation." Griffin set his glass on the balustrade and looked at her directly. "I came to see it for myself, to make sure the security systems are operational, and to tell you that what I did, the way I ended things in my office, was necessary." "I know," Tatum said. Griffin paused. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely caught off guard. "You know?" "I found the blueprints, Griffin. The wall safe behind the library panels, your handwriting on the subterranean plans. The biometric locks programmed to my thumbprint, the escape tunnel." She kept her voice level. "I know you didn't throw me away. I know you moved me here because something is happening inside your organization that you didn't want touching me." The silence between them stretched for 5 full seconds. The string quartet played faintly from inside the ballroom. Guests laughed and clinked glasses. The harbor lights shimmered below. "When did you find it?" Griffin asked. "Day 25. "And you didn't call me. You told me not to contact anyone from the organization." A faint sound escaped Griffin's lips, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. He shook his head once, slowly, and for just a moment, the mask he wore in every room slipped a fraction of an inch. Behind it, Tatum saw something she had never seen on his face before. Relief. "You followed the instruction," he said quietly. "I always follow the instruction. That's why you hired me." Griffin picked up his glass again and took a long, slow drink. When he set it down, his expression had reset. The mask was back. The tension in his shoulders had returned. "Enjoy your evening, Tatum," he said. "You've earned it. Everything you see here tonight, every guest, every deal, every connection, that belongs to you. You built it clean." He straightened his coat, turned from the balustrade, and walked toward the service corridor he had used to enter. He was 3 steps away when Tatum spoke.
"Griffin," he stopped. "The East Corridor lock. I'm changing it to biometric tonight. But I'm adding your thumbprint to the system." She paused. "In case you need to come back."
Griffin stood still for a moment. Then he continued walking without looking back, and within seconds, the darkness of the corridor swallowed him completely. Tatum turned back to the harbor view and took a breath. Then she smoothed her dress, reset her expression, and walked back into the ballroom to continue doing what she did best. Running a room full of powerful people who had no idea that the woman shaking their hands had just had a conversation that changed everything she thought she knew about the man who had sent her here. 15 days after the opening gala, Griffin Thorne stood on a concrete loading dock at the edge of the Harbor Industrial District, watching a cargo crane swing a shipping container onto the back of a flatbed truck. It was 11 o'clock at night. The air smelled like diesel fuel and salt water. Arc lights mounted on the warehouse roofline cast sharp white pools across the wet asphalt, leaving everything between them in deep shadow. 2 of his security details stood 30 feet behind him near a black SUV, scanning the perimeter with the practiced patience of men who spent most of their professional lives waiting for trouble that usually didn't arrive. Tonight was different. Tonight, Griffin had specifically told them to expect it. A door opened on the far side of the loading dock. A man walked out of the warehouse and crossed the concrete toward Griffin with the unhurried stride of someone who believed every room he entered belonged to him. He was tall, broad across the chest, with a shaved head and a thick neck that made his open-collared shirt look 2 sizes too small. A gold chain caught the arc light as he moved. Silas Croft, 41 years old, former merchant marine turned logistics captain in the Thorne Syndicate's shipping division. He had run coastal freight routes for the organization for 6 years, moving legitimate cargo through ports up and down the eastern seaboard. He was efficient, reliable, and completely devoid of loyalty to anyone other than himself. Griffin had known for months that Silas was a problem. The signs had been small at first. Late manifests, rerouted shipments that didn't match the schedules, cash discrepancies in the port-side accounts that Silas explained away with stories about fuel surcharges and port authority fees. Individually, each irregularity was minor. Together, they formed a pattern that Griffin recognized immediately, because it was the same pattern every ambitious operator followed when they started building something on the side. Silas was running his own deals through the Thorne shipping lanes, skimming capacity, rerouting containers, and using the organization's infrastructure to service private clients who paid in cash and didn't ask questions about what was in the boxes. Griffin had let it run long enough to map the full scope. Now, he was here to end it. "Mr. Thorne," Silas said, stopping at the edge of the loading dock with his hands in his jacket pockets. He smiled like a man meeting an old friend at a bar. "Late night for you." "Early morning for you," Griffin replied. "That container your crew just loaded. What's in it?" "Machine parts, industrial hydraulics, bound for a client in Norfolk." "I checked the Norfolk manifest an hour ago. There's no order on file." Silas's smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalculation. Griffin had seen it 100 times in men who realized they were standing in a conversation they hadn't prepared for. "Must be a filing delay," Silas said. "My logistics coordinator has been behind this week. I'll get it sorted." "Your logistics coordinator filed the correct manifest 3 days ago. You amended it yesterday and rerouted the shipment to a private warehouse in the Harbor District, a warehouse that isn't on any Thorne property list." Griffin's voice stayed conversational, almost casual. I own the Port Authority's digital filing system, Silas. Every amendment is logged and time-stamped. You should have remembered that. The smile finally dropped. Silas pulled his hands from his pockets and folded his arms across his chest. The friendly posture was gone, replaced by something harder and more honest. So what are we doing here, Griffin? You want to cut? I want you to stop, tonight. Every private deal, every rerouted container, every cash client you've been servicing on my infrastructure, it ends now. You go back to running your routes clean, and we don't have a problem. Silas laughed. It was a short, dry sound that bounced off the concrete walls of the loading dock. You're 28 years old. You inherited this operation from your father, and you've been running it like a corporate office ever since. Spreadsheets, compliance audits, legitimate business restructuring. He said the last two words like they tasted sour. Some of us remember when this organization actually made real money.
It still makes real money. It just does it legally now.
Legal money is slow money, and slow money makes people restless. Silas unfolded his arms and took a step closer. You want to know what I've been doing? I've been talking to your captains, your dock supervisors, your warehouse managers. Half of them are tired of the margins you're running. Half of them remember how things used to work and want to go back. Griffin absorbed the information without reacting. This was the part he had been waiting for. The moment Silas stopped pretending and started showing the real shape of what he was building. You're organizing a faction, Griffin said. I'm offering an alternative. People follow who they want to follow. And right now, a growing number of your people want to follow someone who isn't afraid to make the kind of money this organization was designed to make. By extorting legitimate businesses, by using the assets we already have. Silas's voice had dropped lower, harder. You have shipping lanes, warehouse space, port access, and a logistics network that covers 12 states. You're using all of it to move legal cargo at legal margins. I'm saying we could triple the revenue in 6 months if we opened certain lanes to certain clients. Clients who move what, exactly? Silas didn't answer that question. He shifted his weight and looked out at the harbor for a moment, then turned back to Griffin with an expression that had shed every trace of pretense. I've already got buyers lined up. What I need is storage. Secure, off-grid, impossible to search without a warrant. Somewhere outside the city where nobody's watching. Griffin felt the temperature of the conversation change. He knew, in the way that a person knows the shape of a room in the dark, exactly where this was heading. What property are you looking at? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. That old estate you signed over to your assistant, Crestview, up on the outer ridge. Silas said the name like it was already his. Big property, isolated. Just had a major renovation with all kinds of underground space. And the woman running it isn't connected to the organization anymore, so there's no paper trail back to you. Griffin didn't move. His expression didn't change. But somewhere deep in the center of his chest, a gear turned and locked into place. Silas had just named Tatum's home, her property, the place she had rebuilt from dust and debris into something the entire city was talking about. And he was standing here on a loading dock at 11 o'clock at night, describing it as a storage facility for whatever cargo he planned to move through his off-book channels. She won't agree to that, Griffin said carefully. She doesn't have to agree. She just has to be persuaded. And persuasion is something I've always been good at. Griffin studied Silas's face for a long moment. The arc lights threw sharp shadows across the man's features, and in that light, Griffin could see clearly what Silas had become. A man who had mistaken Griffin's restraint for weakness and his patience for permission. I'll think about it, Griffin said. Silas grinned. Smart man.
He turned and walked back toward the warehouse, his gold chain swinging with each step. The door closed behind him, and the loading dock fell quiet except for the low hum of the arc lights and the distant sound of water lapping against the pilings. Griffin stood motionless for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "I need a full surveillance profile on Silas Croft. Every contact, every meeting, every communication for the past 90 days. And I need a tactical team on standby. 6 people, mobile, ready to deploy to the outer ridge on 12 hours' notice." He ended the call, slid the phone into his pocket, and looked up the ridge toward the distant glow of the Crestview Sanctuary, visible as a faint, warm light above the tree line. Silas thought Tatum was an easy target, a woman alone on a hilltop with a renovated mansion and no organizational protection. He had no idea what he was walking into, and Griffin intended to make sure that by the time Silas found out, it would be far too late to walk back out. The conservatory was Tatum's favorite room in the sanctuary. On a clear afternoon like this one, the restored glass ceiling flooded the space with natural light, warming the stone floor and the rows of potted ferns and trailing ivy that Nina had selected specifically for this room. The climate sensors in the ceiling panels adjusted automatically, opening narrow ventilation slits when the temperature rose above 74 degrees and closing them when it dropped below 68. The room breathed on its own. Tatum was sitting at a wrought iron table near the center of the conservatory, reviewing booking requests on her laptop when the front gate intercom chimed. She glanced at the security monitor mounted discreetly inside a recessed wall panel to her left. A black SUV was idling at the gate, single vehicle, 2 occupants visible through the windshield. She didn't recognize the car. Tatum pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon." The voice was male, smooth, practiced. "My name is James Redmond. I'm a private acquisitions consultant. I was hoping to speak with the owner of the sanctuary about a potential long-term leasing arrangement. I called your booking line earlier this week, but couldn't get through." Tatum frowned. The booking line had been fully operational all week. She had checked the call logs herself that morning. No missed calls from anyone named Redmond. She could have turned him away at the gate. The Crestview Sanctuary operated on a referral and invitation basis. She had established that policy during the first week after the gala, and it had already become part of the property's mystique. You didn't just show up. You were invited. But something about the voice made her want to see the face behind it. A gut instinct she had developed during 3 years of sitting in rooms with men who said one thing and meant another.
"Come up to the main entrance," she said. "I'll meet you in the conservatory." She watched on the monitor as the SUV rolled up the driveway and parked near the fountain. The passenger door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, shaved head, broad chest, gold chain visible at the collar of his shirt beneath a dark sport coat that was expensive enough to pass for professional, but cut in a way that suggested the man underneath was used to taking up space. Tatum's hand paused over her keyboard. She had never met Silas Croft, but she had processed his shipping manifests for 2 years while working inside Griffin's organization. She knew his routes, his port schedules, his fuel expenditure patterns, and the names of every dock supervisor who reported to him. She had never seen his face in person, but she had seen his employee photograph in the personnel files she managed. The man walking toward her front door was Silas Croft, and he had introduced himself as James Redmond.
Tatum closed her laptop, set it on the side table behind a potted fern where it wasn't visible, and stood. She smoothed her sleeves. Her phone was in her back pocket. The security system control panel was embedded in the wall 6 feet to her right, disguised as a thermostat. The conservatory had 4 exits: the main archway to the grand hall, a side door to the kitchen corridor, a service door to the garden, and the hidden panel leading to the subterranean stairs. She knew every one of them by heart. The front door opened. Footsteps crossed the marble entrance hall. A moment later, Silas appeared in the conservatory archway with a leather portfolio under his arm and a smile on his face that looked like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. "Ms. Vance?" He extended his hand. "James Redmond, thank you for seeing me on short notice." Tatum shook his hand. His grip was firm and held on half a second longer than necessary.
She met his eyes and kept her expression pleasant and professional, giving away nothing.
"Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across the wrought iron table. "What kind of leasing arrangement are you looking for?" Silas sat and set his portfolio on the table. He made a show of looking around the conservatory. The glass ceiling, the stone floor, the trailing greenery, the view of the estate grounds through the garden side windows. "This is a remarkable property," he said. "The restoration work is exceptional. I've been in commercial real estate for 15 years, and I don't think I've ever seen a private venue of this caliber." "Thank you. What's the nature of your client's needs?" Silas opened his portfolio and slid a single-page document across the table. It was a leasing proposal. Typed, formatted, professional. Monthly rate, duration, access terms. Tatum scanned it quickly. The numbers were generous.
Almost too generous for a venue lease, which told her immediately that the document was a prop. "My client operates a private logistics firm that requires secure off-site storage for sensitive materials," Silas said. "Temperature-controlled, limited access, away from urban surveillance. We've been looking for a property with adequate subterranean space, and the Crestview Sanctuary came to our attention." Tatum set the document down and looked at him. "Subterranean space?" "Yes. We understand the property has a lower level with reinforced rooms. That would be ideal for our needs." The conservatory was quiet. A fern leaf moved gently in the current from an overhead vent. Somewhere outside, a bird called from one of Nina's newly planted trees.
Tatum folded her hands on the table.
"Mr. Redmond, I appreciate you driving out here, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. The Crestview Sanctuary is a private hospitality venue. We host events, retreats, and long-term residencies for select clients. We don't offer storage facilities of any kind."
"I understand that's the current model. My client is prepared to compensate generously for a modification to that model."
"The model isn't being modified." Silas leaned back in his chair. The polished smile remained, but the warmth behind it had thinned. He studied Tatum the way a man studies a lock he expected to open easily and found more complicated than anticipated.
"Miss Vance, I want to be direct with you. My client has significant resources and significant needs. Properties like yours, isolated, secure, privately owned, are extremely rare. We've done our due diligence. We know the estate sits on 7 acres with limited road access, no adjacent neighbors, and a subterranean level with reinforced vault rooms. That's an asset that shouldn't be underutilized." "It's not underutilized, it's private." "Everything has a price." Tatum let the sentence hang in the air for 3 seconds. Then she reached to her right, pressed a concealed button on the wall panel, and activated the conservatory's lockdown mode. The 4 exits sealed simultaneously. Magnetic bolts engaged in the main archway, the kitchen corridor door, and the service entrance to the garden. The locks made no sound. They were designed to be silent, but the tiny red indicators above each doorframe blinked on in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. The conservatory was now a sealed room. Silas noticed the lights. His smile disappeared. "What just happened?" he asked. Tatum stood. She kept her hands visible, her posture relaxed, and her voice perfectly calm. "Mr. Redmond, or whatever your real name is, I'm going to be very clear with you. You are sitting in my home, on my property, in a room that I control from floor to ceiling. The exits are locked. The cameras in this room are recording, and the security system you are now inside of was designed by people who are significantly better at their jobs than whoever briefed you on this property." Silas looked at the sealed archway behind him.
He looked at the red indicator lights. Then he looked back at Tatum with an expression that had shed every trace of the James Redmond persona. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've processed your shipping manifests for 2 years. I know your routes, your schedules, your fuel costs, and the names of every dock supervisor on your payroll. I also know that you didn't file any leasing inquiry through my booking line, which means you either found this address through organizational channels you shouldn't still have access to, or someone inside the syndicate gave it to you." Silas said nothing. The gold chain at his collar caught the light from the glass ceiling. "Here's what happens now," Tatum continued. "I'm going to unseal the main archway. You're going to walk through it, cross my entrance hall, get into your vehicle, and drive back down the ridge. You will not contact me again. You will not send representatives. You will not come within a mile of this property. And if you mention the words subterranean or vault to anyone in connection with this estate, I will make sure that every port authority audit, every manifest discrepancy, and every fuel surcharge irregularity from the past 6 years lands on the desk of someone who will find them very interesting." The conservatory was perfectly still. Sunlight poured through the glass ceiling and pooled on the stone floor between them. Silas stood slowly. He picked up his portfolio, tucked it under his arm, and looked at Tatum with something that might have been anger or might have been grudging respect. It was hard to tell with men like him. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "I've been told that before, usually by men who underestimated what I'm willing to do to protect what's mine." She pressed the wall panel again. The main archway lock disengaged with a soft click. The red light turned green. Silas walked through it without another word. His footsteps echoed across the marble hall. The front door opened and closed. A moment later, the engine of the black SUV turned over, and tires crunched on the flagstone driveway as the vehicle rolled toward the gate. Tatum stood in the conservatory and listened until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then she picked up her phone, pulled up a number she had saved but never dialed, and typed a single message. "He was here. We need to talk." She sent it to Griffin Thorne and sat back down at her table. Her hands were steady, her pulse was normal, and the conservatory was quiet again, the ferns swaying gently in the automatic breeze, as if nothing had happened at all. Griffin arrived at Crestview the next morning at 6:15, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. He came alone in a dark gray sedan instead of his usual black SUV, and he used the East Corridor entrance, the one Tatum had upgraded to biometric access on the night of the gala. His thumbprint unlocked the door on the first try. Tatum was already awake. She had been up since 4, sitting at the library table with the subterranean blueprints spread out in front of her and a mug of coffee she had reheated twice. When Griffin appeared in the library doorway, she looked up and gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down without pleasantries. His eyes went straight to the blueprints on the table, scanning the layout, the annotations in his own handwriting, and the additions Tatum had made in red ink. New notes marking the positions of every security camera, every motion sensor, every sealed access point she had integrated into the estate during the restoration. "You've mapped the entire perimeter system onto the original plans," he said. "I needed to see everything in one place. Your subterranean layout and my surface defenses on the same document." She turned the blueprint toward him and pointed to the conservatory.
"He came in through the front gate yesterday afternoon, used a fake name, James Redmond, presented a leasing proposal for the underground vault rooms. He knew about the reinforced walls, the access staircase, the ventilation. He knew the layout."
Griffin's jaw tightened. How much detail?
"Enough to describe the subterranean level without ever having been inside it. Which means he either saw the original construction records from the city's archive,
Or someone in your organization who knew about your modifications told him. It's the second one.
Griffin leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly through his nose. I've had my security team running surveillance on Silas for the past 2 weeks. He's been meeting with 3 of my dock supervisors and a port logistics coordinator. All 4 have been on my payroll for years. All 4 have been feeding him operational details in exchange for a cut of whatever he's planning to move through his private channels.
So he has people inside your organization?
Had. As of last night, all 4 have been reassigned to positions with 0 access to sensitive information. They don't know they've been identified yet. I want to keep it that way until Silas makes his move. Tatum studied Griffin's face across the table. The tiredness she had noticed at the gala was deeper now. The skin beneath his eyes was darker, the lines around his mouth more pronounced.
He was carrying something heavy, and he had been carrying it alone for months.
How bad is this?
She asked. Griffin met her eyes. Silas has been building his faction for the better part of a year. He has 8, maybe 10 loyalists spread across the shipping and warehouse divisions. He's been stockpiling resources, cash, vehicles, manpower. His plan is to break off from the organization, take the loyalists with him, and set up an independent operation using infrastructure he's already positioned. The storage at Crestview is the last piece he needs. A secure location outside the city, off-grid, with reinforced space that can hold high-value cargo.
And when I told him no yesterday, what happens to his timeline?
It accelerates. He's been patient because he thought he could get access to Crestview through negotiation. Now that you've shut that door, he'll try to open it another way. He'll send people, maybe 3, maybe 6. They'll come at night, try to breach the perimeter, access the subterranean level through the garden vents or the maintenance shed at the tunnel exit. Tatum glanced at the blueprint and traced her finger along the tunnel route.
The maintenance shed exit is sealed with a steel-reinforced door and a biometric lock. He'd need heavy cutting equipment to get through it. The garden vents are 6 inches in diameter. Nobody's crawling through those. The only viable entry point is the main gate or the perimeter fence along the north tree line, which is the least monitored stretch.
Which is exactly where he'll try.
Then that's where we focus. Griffin looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Something close to admiration mixed with the discomfort of a man who was used to solving every problem himself and was now sitting across from someone who could solve it just as well.
I have a proposal, he said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Go ahead. My security team handles everything outside your property lines. The Ridge Access Road, the approach through the woods, the service road on the south side. If Silas sends people, my team intercepts them before they reach your perimeter. They get turned back, restrained if necessary, and removed from the area. Nothing touches your gates, your grounds, or your guests.
And inside the property?
That's yours. Your security system, your cameras, your lockdown protocols. You run the interior defense. If anything gets past my team, which it shouldn't, your systems are the second line. Tatum considered this for a moment.
You're asking me to trust your people to hold the outer ring while I protect everything inside.
I'm asking you to let me do the one thing I should have done 3 months ago. Stand between you and the threat instead of sending you away from it. The library was quiet. Morning light was beginning to filter through the restored windows, casting long amber rectangles across the mahogany panels, and the blueprints spread between them. There's a condition, Tatum said. Name it. Whatever happens with Silas, it stays off my land. No confrontations on my property. No incidents that touch the sanctuary's reputation. I have a guest list that includes some of the most prominent names in the country. A tech conference is booked here next month, an investors retreat the month after that. If even a rumor gets out that there was a security incident at Crestview, the bookings collapse, the reputation collapses, and everything I've built becomes worthless. Nothing will reach your gates, Griffin said. That's my guarantee. And the guests who are staying on site this week? They won't know anything happened. My team operates silently. No uniforms, no visible vehicles, no communication on public frequencies. As far as your guests are concerned, the only thing outside the sanctuary is trees and starlight. Tatum picked up her red pen and drew a line on the blueprint along the north tree line.
This section of the perimeter, from the maintenance shed to the northeast corner, is the weakest point. The ground slopes downhill, there's natural cover from the oaks, and the fence runs through a drainage gully that creates a gap of about 18 inches at the base.
I'll position 2 people in the tree line on the high ground above the gully, with sight lines to the fence and the access road below.
Put a third person at the maintenance shed. If Silas has someone who knows about the tunnel exit, that's where they'll probe first. Griffin pulled a small notebook from his jacket and began writing. Tatum watched him work, the same sharp handwriting, the same quick underlines on key words. For a moment, the library felt like the old days, the 2 of them in a room, mapping out a problem, dividing the labor, each one trusting the other to handle their half without being asked twice. Except this time, the room was hers. The property was hers. And the problem was about protecting something she had built from the ground up rather than maintaining something she had inherited from someone else. They worked for another 40 minutes, refining positions, mapping communication protocols, establishing check-in schedules. Griffin would have his team in position by nightfall. Tatum would run a full systems check on every camera, sensor, and biometric lock on the property. They agreed on an encrypted channel for direct communication, a frequency Hector had built into the estate's private network during the renovation. When they were finished, Griffin stood and rolled the blueprints carefully. He handed them back to Tatum.
"Keep these in the vault," he said. "If anything goes sideways, the subterranean level is your fallback. The escape tunnel runs clean to the tree line. My team will have a vehicle waiting at the exit point around the clock."
"Nothing is going sideways," Tatum said. "I didn't rebuild this house from rubble just to hide underneath it." Griffin looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he nodded once, a small, firm motion that carried more weight than any words you could have offered. He left through the east corridor. Tatum heard the biometric lock click behind him. And then she was alone in the library with the morning light, the blueprints, and the sound of her own steady breathing. She had 4 days before Silas would likely make his move. 4 days to make sure that every inch of the Crestview Sanctuary was sealed tighter than a vault, and that the woman inside it was ready for whatever came up that ridge. Day 100, 2:14 in the morning.
The Crestview Sanctuary was dark and quiet. Inside the mansion, 12 guests were asleep across 6 of the upper-floor suites. A venture capital firm from the West Coast had booked the entire second floor for a 5-day private retreat, strategy sessions during the day, fine dining in the evening, and the kind of absolute privacy that only a property like the Sanctuary could provide. They had arrived 3 days ago, spent their afternoons on the terrace reviewing pitch decks, and retired each night to rooms where the smart glass windows dimmed automatically as the harbor lights came on. They had no idea that 400 meters below the ridge, in the dense tree line along the north perimeter, 6 of Griffin Thorne's most experienced security operatives had been positioned in rotating shifts for the past 96 hours. Tatum was in the East Wing control room, the one behind the sliding bookcase panel in the library hallway. 3 monitors glowed in front of her, each one divided into quadrants, showing live feeds from the perimeter cameras. The garden fixtures, the stone urns, the iron lampposts, the sundial near the front gate, all of them feeding crisp night vision footage into the encrypted security network Hector had built. She had barely slept in 4 days. Catnaps on the library sofa between system checks, coffee from the kitchen at midnight, a change of clothes pulled from her closet at dawn before the guests came downstairs for breakfast. She had hosted every meal, attended every strategy session,
answered every question from the retreat participants, and maintained the warm, effortless hospitality that had become the sanctuary's signature, all while monitoring a security grid designed to detect a breach that could arrive at any hour. Her phone sat on the console beside the monitors, open to the encrypted channel she shared with Griffin.
Over the past 4 days, the messages had been brief and operational. Team in position, North Tree Line covered. Surveillance shows Silas mobilizing vehicles, 3 SUVs, 7 personnel confirmed. Movement tonight possible. Stand by. That last message had come in at 11:40 p.m., 2.5 hours ago. Since then, silence. Tatum watched the monitors. The perimeter cameras showed the same stillness they had shown every night. Dark trees, the gravel service road winding down the hillside, the distant shimmer of the harbor. An owl passed through the frame of camera 6, low and fast, and disappeared into the woods. At 2:19, her phone buzzed. Griffin. 3 vehicles approaching from the South Service Road. ETA to Ridge Junction. 8 minutes. Moving to intercept. Tatum read the message twice, set the phone down, and activated the full lockdown sequence on the estate's security system. Every exterior door sealed with magnetic bolts. Every window sensor switched to active alert. The perimeter cameras increased their recording resolution from standard to maximum. The interior motion sensors on the ground floor armed themselves in a cascading sequence that took 4 seconds to complete. The mansion remained perfectly silent. Upstairs, the guests slept behind smart glass windows that showed nothing to the outside world. Tatum picked up the phone and typed back, "Estate locked down, interior secure. Go." Then she waited. The Ridge Access Road was a single-lane gravel track that climbed from the main highway through 2 miles of wooded hillside before reaching the Crestview property gate. It was the only vehicle-accessible route to the estate from the south. Griffin had identified it during their planning session as the most likely approach for Silas, wide enough for SUVs, remote enough to avoid witnesses, and far enough from the mansion that a confrontation there would produce 0 disturbance at the gates. Griffin was positioned at the midpoint of the access road, roughly 1 mile from the highway turnoff and 1 mile from the property gate. His vehicle was parked in a clearing behind a stand of pines, lights off, engine running. 2 of his operatives were with him. The other 4 were spread along the tree line in pairs, covering the road from elevated positions on both sides. At 2:27, headlights appeared at the base of the ridge. 3 black SUVs moving in a tight convoy, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they climbed the gravel road. They moved at moderate speed, fast enough to suggest purpose, slow enough to suggest caution. The drivers knew where they were going. Griffin stepped out of his vehicle and walked to the center of the road. He stood alone in the dark with his hands at his sides, directly in the path of the approaching convoy. The lead SUV's headlights found him at 200 meters. The vehicle slowed. At 100 meters, it stopped. The other 2 SUVs halted behind it, their engines idling, their headlights creating a corridor of white light along the gravel, with Griffin standing at its center. The driver's door of the lead vehicle opened. Silas Croft stepped out, leaving the door ajar behind him. He was wearing a black jacket and dark jeans, and his expression carried the focused intensity of a man who had committed to a course of action and didn't intend to reverse it. "Griffin," Silas said the name like a greeting between equals. "Didn't expect to find you up here at 2 in the morning. And I didn't expect to find you driving toward a property that doesn't belong to you with 7 men and 3 vehicles at 2 in the morning. But here we are." Silas glanced at the dark tree line on either side of the road. He couldn't see Griffin's operatives, but he was smart enough to know they were there. His eyes swept the shadows, calculating. "I'm not here for trouble," Silas said. "I'm here to collect what I was promised." "Nobody promised you anything. I told you I'd think about it, and I thought about it. The answer is no." "The answer was no from your assistant, too, and yet here I am. Because the people who are backing me don't accept no as easily as you'd like." The people backing you are 4 men who were on my payroll until 72 hours ago, when I reassigned every one of them to positions where they can't access a filing cabinet, let alone a shipping manifest. Griffin's voice carried down the road without effort. Your logistics coordinator, your 3 dock supervisors, all 4 of them are sitting in windowless offices right now, processing archived paperwork from 2019. They don't know they've been identified, but they also can't move a single container, reroute a single shipment, or access a single port schedule. Your supply chain is gone, Silas. The silence on the ridge road was absolute.
The SUV engines idled. Silas stood in the headlights, and for the first time, the confidence on his face showed a fracture.
You're bluffing, he said. Call one of them. Right now. Ask them to pull up your Norfolk manifest. Ask them to confirm the container you loaded 2 weeks ago. See what happens. Silas didn't reach for his phone. The fracture widened.
Here's what I'm offering you, Griffin continued.
Turn your vehicles around. Drive back down this ridge. Tomorrow morning, you report to my office, and we discuss a clean exit from the organization. You keep your personal assets. You keep your reputation. You walk away whole, and nobody outside this road ever knows tonight happened.
And if I don't?
Then the surveillance footage of your private cargo operations, every rerouted container, every off-book client, every cash transaction, gets forwarded to the Port Authority, the Maritime Commission, and every legitimate shipping company whose lanes you've been hijacking. That's not organizational leverage, Silas. That's public record. And it ends your career in logistics permanently.
Griffin let the words settle. The gravel road was quiet. The trees stood dark and tall on both sides. Somewhere in those trees, 6 operatives waited with the patience of people who had done this kind of work 100 times before.
Silas stood in the headlights for a long time. His hands hung at his sides. His jaw worked silently, grinding through calculations that all led to the same conclusion. Then he turned, walked back to the lead SUV, and got in. The door closed. The vehicle reversed slowly until it reached a section of road wide enough to turn. The other 2 SUVs followed. One by one, they rotated and drove back down the ridge, their taillights shrinking into red pinpoints before the darkness swallowed them entirely. Griffin stood in the empty road and listened until the engines faded to nothing. Then he pulled out his phone. Neutralized. All 3 vehicles retreating. No contact with the property. No incidents. Tatum read the message in the control room. She closed her eyes for 3 full seconds, the longest pause she had allowed herself in 4 days.
Then she opened them, disengaged the lockdown sequence, and watched on the monitors as the magnetic bolts retracted silently from every door and the window sensors returned to passive mode. The Crestview Sanctuary exhaled. Upstairs, the venture capital team slept through the entire thing. In the morning, they would come downstairs, eat breakfast on the terrace, comment on the beautiful sunrise over the harbor, and never once suspect that 400 meters down the ridge, the most dangerous moment in the sanctuary's brief history had come and gone in the space of 11 minutes. Tatum leaned back in her chair and looked at the monitors. All clear. Every camera showed nothing but dark trees, still air, and the first faint suggestion of dawn on the eastern horizon. She picked up her phone and typed one final message to Griffin. Clean. Thank you. Then she stood, closed the control room, slid the bookcase panel back into place, and walked upstairs to shower and change before her guests woke up. There was breakfast to prepare, a retreat schedule to manage, and a reputation to maintain. The sanctuary was safe, and the woman who ran it hadn't missed a single beat. 20 days had passed since the night on the Ridge Road, and the Crestview Sanctuary had become the most talked-about private venue in the country.
The media attention started with a single profile piece in a national architecture magazine. A journalist who had attended the opening gala wrote a 4-page spread on the restoration, the original 1920s construction, the 12 years of abandonment, and the remarkable transformation led by a woman named Tatum Vance, whom the article described as the most quietly formidable figure in luxury hospitality. The piece included photographs of the ballroom, the conservatory, the restored library, and the harbor view from the Widow's Walk. It ran on a Tuesday. By Friday, the sanctuary's private booking line had received over 300 inquiries. A week later, a global business publication ran a feature titled The New Power Address that named the Crestview Sanctuary alongside century-old private clubs and legendary resort properties as one of the most exclusive gathering spaces in the world. The article noted that the sanctuary's guest list already included tech billionaires, media executives, venture capital firms, and 2 of the country's most influential philanthropic foundations. Booking requests were being waitlisted into the following year. Tatum read both articles at her desk in the library, the same mahogany-paneled room where she had discovered the hidden blueprints 3 months earlier. The brass reading lamps cast warm circles of light across the table. The shelves were full now, stocked with first editions, reference volumes, and a curated collection of rare maps that Dominique had sourced from estate sales across the Northeast. The room smelled like polished wood and old paper, and the faint trace of the espresso Tatum had made herself that morning in the kitchen. She closed the magazine and set it aside. Outside the library windows, Nina's landscaping had matured into something extraordinary. The gravel pathways wound through beds of native lavender and sage, the mature oaks were illuminated by subtle ground-level lighting, and the central fountain caught the afternoon sun and threw scattered light across the flagstone driveway. A pair of guests from a corporate retreat currently occupying the 2nd floor were walking the grounds together, deep in conversation, their silhouettes framed by the harbor beyond. This was hers. Every stone, every beam, every inch of restored plaster and polished brass. She had built it with borrowed money, hired talent, sleepless nights, and the kind of focused determination that didn't ask for permission or wait for approval. 4 months ago, she had stood in a dusty entrance hall with a flashlight and a manila folder, looking at a ruin. Now, she was sitting in a room that people flew across the country to see. Her phone buzzed, a message from the front gate security system. Guest arriving. Biometric match. Griffin Thorne. East Corridor. Tatum smiled slightly. She had added his thumbprint to the system on the night of the gala, and he had used it exactly twice since then. Once for their planning session in the library, and once 3 days after the Ridge Road incident, to deliver a brief in-person confirmation that Silas had accepted the clean exit and left the organization permanently. Both visits had been early morning, operational, and short. This one was different. This time, he had called ahead. Yesterday afternoon, a message on the encrypted channel. "Can I come by tomorrow evening? Not operational. Personal." Tatum had written back a single word. Yes. She heard the East Corridor door open and close, followed by footsteps crossing the entrance hall and climbing the grand staircase. She had told him to meet her on the private rooftop terrace, the Widow's Walk, rebuilt with tempered glass railings and furnished with a pair of deep lounge chairs, a low table, and a view that stretched from the harbor to the open water. She took the stairs up and stepped out onto the terrace. The evening air was warm, carrying the faint scent of sage from the gardens below. The city skyline glowed to the south, and the harbor lights reflected off the water in long, wavering columns of gold and white. Griffin was already there. He stood at the glass railing, looking out at the view, wearing a dark jacket over a simple shirt with no tie. His hands rested on the railing, and for the first time since Tatum had known him, his posture carried no tension. His shoulders were level. His jaw was relaxed. He looked like a man who had set something heavy down and was still adjusting to the lightness.
Tatum walked to the low table, where she had set out a bottle of something from the sanctuary's private collection and 2 glasses. She poured both and carried one to Griffin. He took it and raised it slightly. To the sovereign empress of the Outer Ridge. To the man who thought he was giving away a liability and accidentally gave away an empire. They touched glasses and drank. The evening settled around them. Warm air, distant city sounds, the slow pulse of the harbor lights below. "Silas is gone," Griffin said. "Left the city last week. Took a consulting position with a freight company on the West Coast. Clean separation, no loose ends, no contact with any former associates. My security team confirmed it yesterday." "And the 4 men inside your organization?" "Transferred to desk positions permanently. They'll spend the next few years processing archives and filing compliance reports. They're useful enough to keep and boring enough to forget. The faction is dissolved." Tatum leaned against the railing beside him. The glass was cool in her hand. Below them, the sanctuary's grounds stretched out in the evening light. The pathways, the gardens, the fountain, the restored facade of the mansion itself, glowing softly from the interior lighting that Hector had designed to make the stonework look like it was lit from within. "I have something for you," Griffin said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Legal paper, thick stock, with a notary seal at the bottom. He held it out to her. Tatum took it and unfolded it. She read it once, then read it again. It was a formal protection agreement, a private security contract drawn up by Griffin's legal team and structured as a legitimate business arrangement between his firm and the Crestview Sanctuary. Under its terms, Griffin's security operation would provide permanent perimeter protection for the estate, personnel, surveillance, rapid response, at no cost to Tatum. The contract had no expiration date. The only termination clause gave Tatum sole authority to end the arrangement at any time, for any reason, with no penalty. "You're guaranteeing my security," she said. "I'm formalizing what already exists. My team has been watching the ridge since the day you moved in. This just puts it on paper." "At no cost." "You built something that matters, Tatum. Something clean, something real. Something that this city needed and didn't know it needed. Protecting that isn't a cost. It's an investment I'm making because I believe in what you've created here." Tatum folded the document and held it against her chest. She looked at Griffin, and for a moment, the 4 months between them collapsed. The cold dismissal in his office, the long drive to the ridge, the dusty mansion, the sleepless nights, the restoration, the gala, the terrace conversation, the blueprints, Silas, the locked conservatory, the planning session in the library, the 11 minutes on the ridge road, and every quiet hour in between. All of it had led here. To this terrace, this view, this evening, and this man standing beside her, offering to guard the walls of something she had built entirely on her own. "I have a condition," she said. Griffin almost smiled. "You always have a condition." "When you visit the sanctuary, and you're welcome any time, you come through the front gate. No more service corridors, no more incognito arrivals. You walk through the main entrance and the guest book gets your real name." "Why?" "Because I don't want anyone protecting this place from the shadows anymore, including you. If you're part of the Crestview Sanctuary, you're part of it publicly. That's how I run things here." Griffin looked at her. The harbor lights reflected in his eyes, and the faint trace of a smile, the first genuine one she had ever seen from him, settled across his face. "Front gate," he said. "Real name, I can do that." "Good." They stood together on the rooftop terrace and looked out at the city that had once overlooked both of them. The man who ran his empire from a room with no nameplate, and the woman who had been discarded with a manila folder and a set of keys to a ruin. Below them, the Crestview Sanctuary glowed against the ridge like a beacon. Booked solid for 18 months, featured in every publication that covered luxury, architecture, and influence. Home to the most exclusive guest list in the country, and protected, from this night forward, by a formal agreement between two people who had spent 4 months learning what it meant to trust each other from opposite sides of a wall. Tatum finished her drink and set the glass on the railing.
"Thank you, Griffin,"
She said quietly.
"for the mansion, for the blueprints, for the escape tunnel I never had to use, and for standing on that road at 2 in the morning so I didn't have to."
Thank you for turning a ruin into something I couldn't have imagined.
That's what happens when you throw something away and it lands in the right hands.
Griffin laughed, a real laugh, low and warm, the first she had ever heard from him. It echoed softly off the glass railings and drifted out over the ridge, carried by the evening breeze toward the harbor and the open water beyond. Tatum Vance stood on the rooftop of her empire, overlooking the city that now knew her name, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Home.